Today's video, I am going to go through my contracts that I give to my clients and go through the importance of why we need good contracts and what are some of the things we should look for in contracts that would really help us as video creators. Now, by no means am I a lawyer. I'm also based in the UK, so some of the laws and the judicial locations might change. I don't know what the right technical term is. As you can tell, I don't really know what I'm talking about. I will just go through some of the things I've added throughout my career as a professional videographer. Some of the things that I had to change that actually was damaging my relationships with some of my clients. And fundamentally, this will help you to become more professional and safer so that you can actually get paid and have everything legit. And I think that's really important. And honestly, sometimes as videographers and photographers who are starting out or young in their profession, they can get taken advantage of a little bit. I want to try and help you to avoid some of the mistakes I made and to actually protect yourself from any issues that may arise through miscommunication or mistakes or etc. etc. The first thing that I think everybody needs to put in their contract is a detailed scope of the project you're working on. Now, the scope of the project is essentially everything that you need to include. So the deliverables, how many are there? What format the video is going to be, what aspect ratio it's going to be in, the timeline on when it's going to be delivered, the exact creative ideation or creative limits there are. And the reason why this is important is having all this detailed stuff is that's kind of the meat and bones of a contract anyway. This is the sort of stuff that you would figure out on email with a client. Getting it down onto a contract that literally says you are agreeing to this creative output on this date to be shot at, to deliver on this day, to be edited by this time, to have this many drafts, etc., etc. And basically what that does is that it creates boundaries. And a lot of managers and marketing managers and founders and clients often don't realize, but having limits and having boundaries in a creative space actually makes creativity flourish. And it stifles the paradox of choice when you could just do loads and loads of different things. It also protects your time as a creative, because very often, whether it's intentionally or not intentionally, some clients and some managers and some people who you're working with will continue to ask you for things that you didn't agree to that may actually take you more time than they realize, and you won't get paid for it unless you push back and say this is beyond the scope of the original agreement. I'll give you an example. Let's say I have a podcast client that wants me to film a podcast for them. Now, what I could do is I could say you'll get a full-length 60-minute podcast video and a social media trailer highlight video to promote it. Essentially, the meat of the bones is that you get two videos, the full-length video and the highlight trailer. Let's say you complete both those videos, you send it off to the client, and they come back and they say, oh my gosh, this is amazing. We love your work. We're so grateful that you've done this. Can you also just clip up these sections here from when he says this and this? We just would love to promote this on social media. This is when you as a creative need to say, absolutely, I would love to help you promote this video further. However, it is slightly beyond the scope of the original agreement. Because of the extra value that I'm adding, this will need to be compensated at A amount or B amount or X amount, right? So having an agreement where you say this is the scope of the project or the scope of the agreement allows you to upsell some other aspects of video editing and video process or photos or extra. But if you don't have a scope of the project, they could take advantage of you and say, we're not paying you until we get 50 clips or this and that. And it's much more difficult to go to a court of law and get your money from them. Anyways. Another clause that I think you should add into your contract, now this one might seem a little harsh, but I think it's really important, is a non-circumnavigation contract. Now this basically stops clients from poaching your like workers or employees or subcontractors. Now, essentially how it works is, let's say me has a project and I hire a photographer to help me on that project. What a non-circumnavigation clause does is that the client can't go to the photographer and say, well, we've got an event that we need photos for in 2 months' time, and then the photographer and the client work and they miss me out. Now, the reason why I don't do this is because I got the work with the client and I'm the person who has the relationship with the client, and it's all about preserving that relationship with the client. And I also have a separate relationship with this subcontractor. That subcontractor is working for me. They're not just freelancing willy-nilly. I got them that work by having the relationship with the client. Now, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a betrayal for the client to go to the photographer, because the client might not know. And it's always good to bring it to an awareness that actually they need to come to me first, because I offer photography as a package. And that photographer has been approved by me, and more often than not, I'm the one editing the photos. So a non-circumnavigation clause basically stops the client from working with or paying a subcontractor or an employee of mine for work that I could achieve and I could do for a period of like 6 months or 12 months or whatever it might be. It might seem harsh, but at the end of the day, if you're a subcontractor, you should never be going around the person who's hired you for a project. You should always, out of courtesy, for the relationship that the client and the production company or me or freelancer has, you should never go around the back, and you should always try and like find your own clients and use, and you know, some people might say you can't even use the shoot as a portfolio piece. Now, I don't agree with that. That's not how I work. I like to say that anyone who works with me or for me can use that project as a portfolio piece for their own, and that can help them get other work, and that can help them to get more projects of their own and clients of their own. But I don't allow them to work with my clients and my relationships with my clients, and they also have to reference that they were, what role they did in that role, if that makes sense. Another one that's really important, and it's just below that one, is the creative control and revisions. And this clause essentially stops clients from, kind of going back to what I originally said about the scope of the project. Often a client has an opportunity before they hire you to look at previous work that you've done, to have a somewhat interview or a like pre-production call, and go through the ideas and the creativity and the way that you work. They have to be aware of that to some extent. And if they hire you, that client is hiring you with the understanding that you've done this sort of work and your abilities at this level. So if they then ask for you to edit and do stuff at this level, but they aren't willing to pay for that level, or they're not expecting this level, even though that's what they've hired you for, then you can push back and say, well, that's beyond the creative liberty that I have as a creative, and you hired me based off of my portfolio, of the work I've previously done. And this is where it's really important that you don't sell or oversell yourself as a creative or as a videographer or photographer. My best piece of advice, honestly, about everything that I do is to never oversell and underdeliver, but it's always to sell correctly and then overdeliver. So it's to sell and not to undersell and overdeliver, because you never want to undersell yourself. You want to sell yourself to be, this is exactly where you should be, and then it's to take it the extra mile. And that can be done in loads of different ways, and that's not really what I'm talking about. But the creative revisions and the creative control basically stops a client from saying, you know what, I just don't like this video, I want you to do it like this style. And then they send you a link to some random edit, and you can basically say like, no, that's not my style of editing, that's not what I have done previously, and you hired me based off my previous work. You can't tell me to just edit, and they still have to pay because they hired you off that basis. This stops clients from basically just saying, no, I don't like the music, just change the song, essentially. Which, to be fair, is not the biggest problem, and it's honestly nowadays. Just pick the song before you start editing. It's not that big of a deal. Anyways, there's like so many things in my contract that I want to talk about, but this video is going to be way too long. The third really important thing that I think a lot of people would forget to include into their contracts is a late payment terms. The reason why this is super important is that if you do have to go to small claims court to try and recoup some of the funds that someone hasn't sent you for whatever reason, it's really important that you make it clear what's going to happen if they don't pay. Now, there are some limitations with this, specifically in the UK, under the Consumer Rights Act in 2015, where consumers do have certain rights that we must not impede on as a freelancer. Say you have a wedding couple or wedding clients, and they just can't afford something, and you're being super harsh, and then you fine them for being 1 day late. Now, technically, they are late, but a judge is going to see that as you being abusive, and they're not going to be treating you as the freelancer very kindly. So what my biggest recommendation is to not focus on not being paid as like the world's worst thing to possibly happen. It's not an insult, and maybe it is an insult, but don't treat it as an insult to you as a creative. Treat it as just a bit of a hurdle. And this is where things like cash flow is really important, and having an emergency fund as a videographer or as a creative, it gives you that slight bit of leeway that you can give clients a bit extra time to get those payments. But you do have to be clear that if they don't pay, and if they just refuse to pay, that there will be consequences and you will take them to small claims court. And I would recommend every single person out there who's trying to be a videographer to just go through the process of like what it would take to go to a small claims court, because the process is easier than you think, but you want to stack as many cards on your side as possible so that if someone is being intentionally late to payments or intentionally abusing that generosity of you giving them extra time, that you do have the right to recoup that money a legal way. But there's things that the court would want to see where like you give them enough time. So like let's say the invoice has to have enough time for them to pay, because some companies or some people can't pay until they're being paid, or they haven't gotten payroll, and like the 30-day payroll might not be 2 days from now. So you can't write in the invoice be like, pay me tomorrow. Unless that's fully agreed on beforehand, then they can do that. But it's better to just give them like 2 weeks for like clients that aren't companies, and then if it is corporations, then you can do like 30 days or 45 days. And then what you need to do is, if they don't pay, is say, chase them up once through an email. If they still don't respond after 2 weeks, that's when you need to write a letter saying that they are now going to be charged interest in another 2 weeks if they don't pay. Now, there's a certain limit about how much interest you can charge and stuff like that. If they still refuse to pay after that, that's when you can take them to small claims court. But it's just a long process, and you need it to be long because when you do go to court, you want to show the judge that you have tried everything in your power, you've been as reasonable as possible, you've given them ample time to pay you, and that's when it makes you, the victim, look like a victim, and you are a victim, and that's when they can enforce a judge to get you to get paid. I think that's how it works. I'm also not a lawyer, probably shouldn't be saying this as legal advice. Is this all legal advice? I am not a lawyer, guys, so please don't take this as like legal advice. This is just like my experience and things that have helped me with my clients. Yeah, I don't want to get in trouble for giving advice. Guys, don't listen to anything I'm saying. I'm slightly running out of time to make this YouTube video, so I'm going to do a quick fire round of things that you should definitely include that are in my contract that you should also include in yours. You need to do a meal and a break time. You're not an employee anymore. They're not just going to give it to you. You have to dictate it in the contract that if you are working for X amount of time, you will get a 30-minute, 1 hour break. And if you're working on a project, that food will be provided for you, etc., etc. Make sure that's in there. Extra hours and overtime. if you are being asked to stay on an event, you have to make it clear in the contract that for every half an hour extra that you work, and I do half an hour, is that you'll be paid X amount every half an hour that you work overtime. You don't want to be abused and just asked to stay on set just for an extra half an hour. No, it's I work from here and I finish it here. Keep that control. That's why you want to do this at the end of the day. You want to be a freelancer because you want control over your destiny. You want to create your empire. It's all about you. So don't let clients just make you stay for an extra hour. Unless you're like me and I just always am like people pleasing and I want to do the very best to like, but also I have never once in my life charged overtime to anybody because I just think like, I just like making videos and, you know, I'd probably only ever do it if I really didn't like the gig or I really didn't like the client. But most of the time I'm more than happy to stay for a bit longer or to film a bit longer just to get the shots because at the end of the day, actually, it's fine. It's not the end of the world. Okay, I'm gonna stop yapping. I'm trying my best to figure out ideas of like YouTube videos that some people might find helpful. So if you have any ideas of like YouTube videos that you would like to like learn more about, or you think you want some random guy on the internet's opinion about, then please let me know. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe.